There are places in this world where the very air seems to hold its breath, where stone does not simply rest but speaks, and where silence carries the weight of 1,000 forgotten truths. Among the sands of Egypt, beneath skies burnished with the gold of endless suns, there stands such a place, a temple not merely of stone and ritual, but of vision and mystery. It is here, within these carved walls and shadowed halls, that whispers of the universe itself appear to have been etched in stone. This temple is not just a monument to God's long past, it is a blueprint, a subtle yet deliberate reflection of the very structure of reality itself, concealed within art, geometry, and myth. To step into its presence is to step into a mirror that reflects not only the cosmos but the soul. One cannot begin such a journey without first surrendering to the vastness of time. Imagine standing before these stones that have weathered millennia, feeling the desert wind as it slips between the cracks, carrying with it the memory of ages. These walls have witnessed empires rise and fall, generations live and perish, yet they remain, an eternal testament to something larger than dynasty or ritual. The architects of this sacred space were not merely builders but visionaries who recognized that the temple was more than shelter, more than altar, it was a codex in stone. Each block, each column, each engraving was a letter in an eternal language, one that speaks not to the ears but to the deeper faculties of awareness. The phrase blueprint of reality may sound abstract, even exaggerated, until one realizes that ancient cultures were never careless with symbols. They saw the visible world as a veil, a flickering shadow cast by greater truths. For them, temples were designed as living diagrams of existence itself, maps not only of the heavens but of consciousness, anatomy, and the subtle threads that bind the seen and unseen. The Egyptian temple we turn to in this exploration stands as one of the most eloquent expressions of this tradition. It was not constructed only for priests to recite hymns or for kings to display their might, it was carefully measured and aligned to teach, to initiate, and to awaken. To approach such a structure with modern eyes is both exhilarating and humbling. We, who have dissected the atom and measured the galaxies, still find ourselves mystified by the sheer intentionality embedded in these walls. How could people so distant from our era know so much, not only about the stars above but the architecture of the mind within? The question itself hints at the essence of the temple's hidden design. Reality is not linear, knowledge is not bound by centuries, and truth transcends the fragile limits of time. The builders did not merely craft a sanctuary for ritual, they wove into its foundations a reminder that reality itself has a structure, a sacred order, and that we, whether knowingly or not, are participants in it. When we speak of blueprints, we usually think of buildings, mechanical devices, or plans waiting to become physical. But here the word takes on another dimension. The blueprint embedded in this temple is not for the eye alone but for the soul. It is a design of harmony, where geometry mirrors the stars, where proportions echo the mathematics of life itself, and where stories carved in stone are not only myths of gods but parables of inner awakening. The temple is both map and mirror, a map of how reality is woven together, and a mirror of how we fit within its weave. Walking into such a temple is not unlike stepping into a dream crafted deliberately by the ancients. The corridors seem to fold time, the columns rise not merely upward but inward, guiding perception into subtler layers. Light filters through openings as though choreographed, casting patterns that shift with the day and remind the observer of cycles grander than any single lifetime. The figures on the walls, their gestures and forms, become more than decoration, they are gestures of eternity, fingers pointing toward hidden stars, eyes gazing into the infinite. The initiate who walked these halls did not simply observe but participated. Each step was a lesson, each chamber a stage in an inner unfolding. This is the significance of saying that what is hidden inside the temple is nothing less than the blueprint of reality. It is not a treasure one can hold in the hand or store away in a chest. It is an orientation, a revelation that life is patterned, that existence is not chaotic but woven through laws as elegant as they are mysterious. The ancients did not describe these laws with equations or graphs but with myth and geometry, with columns aligned to solstices and ceilings painted with constellations. They encoded in silence what words could not bear, that the human being is not separate from the universe but an expression of it, a microcosm reflecting the macrocosm. And so, as we begin this journey of exploration, let us step back from the assumption that temples are mere ruins or museums of a bygone faith. Instead, let us consider them as repositories of living wisdom, designed not only to honor gods but to awaken humanity to its own divinity. This Egyptian temple, with its measured stones and symbolic artistry, whispers across time that the secrets of existence are not hidden in distant galaxies but woven into the very patterns of life we inhabit each day. To uncover what lies inside is not merely to learn history, it is to remember ourselves. What we are about to explore is both archaeological and existential. It is a study not of crumbling pillars but of the architecture of meaning, not of rituals lost to time but of truths still waiting to be recognized. The temple becomes a stage upon which the drama of being unfolds, teaching us that to understand its walls is to understand the world, and to understand the world is to better understand ourselves. As the sands settle and the stars rise over the horizon, the invitation is clear. Let us step through the threshold of this temple not as tourists or scholars but as seekers, willing to listen to the language of stone and silence, geometry and myth. Within these walls lies the possibility of perceiving reality not as a random scattering of events but as a coherent, elegant design, a design that, once glimpsed, can transform not only how we see the world but how we live within it. To understand the deeper intention behind an Egyptian temple described as holding the blueprint of reality, we must first allow ourselves to perceive it as more than stone and artistry. The ancients did not divide their world into the secular and the sacred the way we do today. For them, the sacred was everywhere, woven into the grain of wood, the shimmer of water, the rising of the sun. A temple was therefore not a site isolated from life but a condensation of life's very essence, a model, a diagram, a reminder of how existence itself was structured. When one speaks of a blueprint, one speaks of patterns, and the ancient Egyptians were master observers of patterns, not only in the stars above or the Nile's rhythms below but in the mysterious interplay between body, mind, and cosmos. One of the core themes carved into these stones is the principle of correspondence, the idea that what happens in the heavens resonates upon the earth, and what unfolds in the cosmos reverberates within the individual. The temple embodies this correspondence by aligning itself with celestial events, placing its axis in tune with solstices, equinoxes, and the eternal dance of stars. To stand in its halls during dawn was not only to witness light creeping into stone chambers but to participate in a ritual where heaven and earth became one continuum. The builders understood that the rising sun was not just a ball of fire in the sky but a metaphor for the rising of awareness within the human heart. From this principle emerges another, the recognition that reality is not a single plane of existence but a layered tapestry. The visible world, the realm of form, was but one layer, supported by subtler strata that were invisible yet no less real. The temple's structure mirrors this vision. Outer courtyards welcomed the common people, inner sanctuaries admitted only the initiated, and hidden chambers remained reserved for those who had passed through symbolic trials of understanding. This gradual movement inward was not only architectural but philosophical. It reflected the passage of consciousness from outer distractions to inner silence, from multiplicity toward unity. The temple was a physical enactment of an inward journey, guiding each step as though walking through a map of consciousness itself. Another guiding pillar of this temple lies in its geometry. Proportions were never random, they were deliberate echoes of cosmic ratios, rhythms that nature herself repeats in seashells, flowers, and galaxies. The golden ratio, the sacred triangle, the precise orientation of columns, all reflected an understanding that beauty is the visible face of harmony, and harmony is the signature of truth. The worshipper who entered such a space did not merely see columns, they felt in their bones a resonance, an alignment, as though their body recognized that it, too, was built from the same mathematics. The temple became a tuning fork, striking a note that realigned the soul with universal order. The myths carved into the walls are not to be read as literal tales of gods walking the earth but as allegories of forces alive within every human being. Osiris does not merely die and resurrect in some ancient drama, he dies and resurrects each time we let go of an old self and are reborn into a new awareness. Isis does not only seek her beloved across the scattered lands, she mirrors the nurturing force within us that gathers what has been broken and breathes life into it again. Horus, with his falcon eye ever watchful, is not a distant deity but the vigilant clarity that awakens in our perception when we open ourselves to truth. These myths become instructions, showing how human life reflects cosmic cycles, how death and renewal are not endpoints but rhythms in the eternal dance. If the temple hides a blueprint of reality, it is also a blueprint of the human soul. The ancients did not separate the two. To them, to know oneself was to know the universe, and to know the universe was to know oneself. This was not poetic flourish, it was experiential truth. The body was seen as a temple, with energy flowing like the Nile through its channels, with the heart as altar, and the mind as sacred chamber. To walk into the temple was to be reminded that one's own being is built in similar design, that each breath, each thought, each pulse is part of a grander architecture. It is here we begin to understand what was hidden inside. What was hidden was not a physical object or a secret vault but a teaching encoded into every stone, that reality is ordered, purposeful, and knowable, not through conquest or analysis alone but through alignment, through living in resonance with its patterns. The blueprint was meant to awaken memory, the memory that human life is not random, that existence is not chaos, but that we are participants in a vast, interconnected unfolding. And so, one core theme is harmony. Another is correspondence. Yet another is transformation, for every passage deeper into the temple symbolized a passage into deeper selfhood. These were not passive structures for ritual alone, they were living textbooks, inviting the seeker to walk their halls as one would walk the corridors of their own soul, learning not only about gods and stars but about the silent architecture of being. When seen through this lens, the temple ceases to be an archaeological curiosity and becomes a mirror held up to our age. The ancients asked, through stone and myth, will you remember that life has structure, that there is order in the unfolding, that your being is not separate from the cosmos but is one of its many expressions? The answer is not simply intellectual. It is something one feels when standing before these walls, something that speaks through intuition, silence, and wonder. In these ways, the Egyptian temple offers a coherent vision of reality, layered, harmonious, mythically alive, and deeply participatory. It is a vision that suggests that to live well is to live in resonance with the cosmic design, to walk not as one lost in shadows but as one aligned with the eternal light that carves form from silence. When the ancients etched their stories into stone, they were not chronicling fables to entertain the imagination of future generations, they were inscribing symbolic dramas that revealed, in layered form, the very architecture of being. A temple, then, becomes a theater of eternity. Its walls are not mute, they speak in allegories, in visual metaphors that point beyond themselves. To walk into such a space is to be invited into a story where gods and humans, cosmos and consciousness, are woven into one continuous fabric. If the earlier sections outline the blueprint of reality through geometry and design, here we descend into its mythic heart, where allegory breathes life into stone. Take, for instance, the drama of Osiris, Isis, and Horus, which repeats itself across temple walls and inscriptions. Osiris, the green-skinned king, represents not just a deity but the principle of order, of life's fertility and continuity. His murder by his brother Set, who embodies chaos and fragmentation, is not merely a tragic tale of jealousy but a reminder that reality itself is always contending with the forces of dissolution. Osiris is dismembered, scattered across the land like seeds lost in the soil, yet Isis, the faithful consort, gathers his pieces and breathes life anew. Out of this union, Horus, the falcon-eyed child, is born. This story is not frozen in myth but acts as an allegorical key. In every human life, Osiris is that part of us that seeks harmony, to live in alignment with truth. Set is the inner and outer chaos, the voice of division and doubt. Isis is the nurturing force of intuition, compassion, and creativity that gathers what has been broken. And Horus, the offspring of this union, is the new awareness, the vision that can see with clarity and pierce through illusion. The temple walls, in preserving this myth, were not simply preserving a cultural tale but providing initiates with a mirror of their own inner cycles: death, fragmentation, remembrance, and rebirth. Even the architecture reflects these narratives. Many temples were built so that one moves from bright outer courtyards into progressively darker chambers, until at last arriving at the innermost sanctuary, often lit only by a shaft of sunlight on particular days of the year. This journey is symbolic. The initiate begins in the daylight of ordinary awareness, passes into the twilight of inner searching, and emerges at last into the illumination of higher vision. The darkness is not an obstacle but a womb. It is the fertile silence where transformation takes place. Just as Osiris's death gives birth to Horus, so too does the seeker's passage through symbolic darkness give rise to awakened perception. The allegories extend further into the celestial. Many temples carried ceilings adorned with stars, with figures of Nut, the sky goddess, arching over the world, swallowing the sun each night and birthing it again at dawn. To the uninitiated, this might seem quaint mythology. To the initiate, it was a profound reminder: existence is cyclical. Death is not an end but a passage. Each sunset is not a closure but a promise of rebirth. Nut's body becomes the vault of the heavens, the temple roof itself, teaching that the universe is both the container and the mother of all life. To walk beneath such imagery was to be reminded, every step, that one's life is not isolated but enfolded in the cosmic embrace. Symbols also embedded themselves in ritual gestures. The ink, the looped cross often carried in the hands of gods in reliefs, was not merely an ornament but the hieroglyph of life itself. It represented the union of masculine and feminine, the blending of opposites into a single generative principle. Within the temple, seeing deities extend the ink toward a pharaoh or initiate was not just a blessing but a transmission. Life flows eternally, and to live in resonance with that current is to live beyond fear of death. To be given the ink was to be reminded that true life is not limited to the physical body but is part of the eternal pulse of existence itself. Consider, too, the motif of the weighing of the heart, often depicted in temple murals and papyri. The deceased's heart is weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and order. If the heart is heavy with dishonesty and imbalance, it fails. If it is light, aligned with truth, it ascends. While often associated with the afterlife, this imagery carried an immediate symbolic weight for the living. The temple became the place where the seeker was called to examine their own heart, to ask, is it heavy with falsehood, burdened by illusion, weighed down by attachment? Or is it light, aligned with harmony and truth? Each ritual was an enactment not only of cosmic order but of an inner ethical compass, teaching that the structure of reality is not indifferent but moral, woven with the law of balance. The symbolic narratives also infused sound and silence. Hymns sung in echoing halls were not mere praise but vibrational alignments, designed to shift consciousness. Silence, too, was part of the drama. Many initiations required periods of deep quiet within the temple, where the initiate would sit surrounded by walls inscribed with myths, absorbing not through lecture but through direct resonance. In this sense, the temple functioned not as a school of words but as a school of being. It taught through myth, geometry, sound, light, and silence, all integrated into one grand symbolic language. Perhaps the most profound narrative hidden in these stones is the recognition that all these symbols, Osiris, Isis, Horus, Nut, Ma'at, were never separate from the human journey. They were personifications of forces at play within every moment of existence. The temple, in its symbolic wealth, whispered to the initiate, "You, too, are Osiris who must die and rise. You, too, are Isis who must gather the fragments of self. You, too, are Horus, the clarity born from struggle." The blueprint of reality is not out there alone, in the cosmos or in stone, but within, reflected in your very life. And so, when the ancients filled their temples with symbolic narratives, they were not hiding fairy tales, they were encoding maps of transformation. To walk through the temple was to walk through the story of life itself, to enact in ritual and vision the eternal truths of death and rebirth, order and chaos, truth and illusion. The temple was not static. It was alive, pulsing with mythic instruction, designed to lead every seeker from ignorance to insight, from fragmentation to wholeness. It is one thing to stand before ancient stones, awed by the sheer persistence of their form and the weight of their mythic stories, and quite another to ask what all of this means for us, here and now. What is the use of recognizing that an Egyptian temple holds the blueprint of reality if it remains an artifact of the past, divorced from the flow of daily life? The true genius of these structures is that they were never meant to be relics. They were designed as living temples, not only for the priest and initiate but for every human being who might one day awaken to the realization that life itself is the temple, and that each day provides opportunities to walk its inner halls. The practical implications of this recognition are as immense as they are intimate. At its heart, the temple whispers of harmony. To live in harmony does not mean chasing perfection or avoiding conflict, but aligning one's actions, thoughts, and intentions with the underlying order of reality. In practice, this translates into cultivating balance in how we live. When we overextend ourselves, when we live with hearts heavy from dishonesty or resentment, we stray from the blueprint, and life begins to feel fragmented. But when we align, through truthfulness, through compassion, through awareness of the cycles in our own bodies and in nature, we rediscover a rhythm that feels like breathing in time with the cosmos. The ancients lived this rhythm consciously, planting crops by the Nile's flood, honoring the sun's rising and setting, and building temples that echoed the heavens. In our modern lives, this might mean reconnecting with natural rhythms, listening to the body's wisdom, or living in ways that honor both inner and outer balance. The symbolic journey from outer courtyard to inner sanctuary has immediate resonance for the way we approach our days. Most of life unfolds in the outer courtyard of distraction, noise, and multiplicity. We are surrounded by screens, responsibilities, and the ceaseless chatter of the world. Yet the temple teaches that deeper chambers exist within us, chambers of silence and illumination that can only be reached by stepping inward. In practice, this calls us to cultivate moments of stillness, whether through meditation, prayer, reflection, or simply quiet walking. The temple shows us that inwardness is not an escape but a passage. In silence we rediscover the inner sanctuary where clarity, like the shaft of sunlight in the innermost chamber, illuminates the heart. The myths themselves carry everyday guidance. To live the story of Osiris is to acknowledge that chaos and fragmentation are inevitable, yet not final. Set, the force of disorder, will always appear in our lives, through loss, betrayal, failure, or inner conflict. But like Isis, we hold within us the capacity to gather the scattered fragments, to weave meaning from brokenness, and to nurture new life. To embody Horus is to allow new vision to emerge, to let clarity and purpose rise from the ashes of trial. These are not abstract dramas, they are the living cycles of human experience. The temple, by encoding these stories in stone, reminds us that every difficulty is a threshold, every ending a womb for rebirth. Even the weighing of a heart carries profound practical weight. Each day we make choices that either lighten or burden the heart. When we act in dishonesty, when we harbor resentment, when we live against our own truth, our heart grows heavy. When we live with integrity, when we act with kindness, when we forgive, the heart becomes lighter. The blueprint of reality is not only cosmic but ethical, woven into the very structure of being. To live aligned with Ma'at is to live in truth, to recognize that balance is not only a cosmic law but a human responsibility. In practice, this might mean pausing before action to ask, will this choice weigh my heart down, or will it lighten it? Geometry itself offers us guidance. The ancients built their temples on ratios that resonate with beauty and harmony. This was not aesthetic indulgence but recognition that harmony heals, while dissonance disrupts. We can integrate this awareness by seeking balance in our surroundings and relationships, creating spaces that nourish rather than drain, fostering conversations that uplift rather than divide. Just as the golden ratio whispers in seashells and galaxies, so too can it whisper in the way we design our days, with time for work and time for rest, time for speech and time for silence, time for self and time for others. Perhaps the most profound implication of the temple's message is that life itself is a ritual, not in the sense of rigid ceremony but in the sense that every act can become sacred when approached with awareness. To eat can be an offering. To breathe can be a prayer. To walk can be a pilgrimage. The ancients understood that the divine was not confined to hidden chambers but present in every detail of existence. To recognize this in our lives is to reclaim a sense of wonder, to live not as though life were random or mechanical but as though it were alive, pulsing with hidden meaning. In this light, the temple ceases to be ancient history and becomes a teacher for the present. Its blueprint urges us to live consciously, to align with truth, to honor cycles of death and rebirth, to nurture harmony, and to recognize that the architecture of the cosmos is reflected in the architecture of our own being. The stones carved thousands of years ago speak as directly today as they did then. Live in balance, live in awareness, live as though your life is itself a temple. To walk through our days with this orientation is to transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. The rising of the sun becomes not just a rotation of the earth but a personal dawn of clarity. The setting sun becomes a reminder of rest and renewal. The trials of life become initiations, each leading deeper into the sanctuary of wisdom. In this way, the Egyptian temple's blueprint is not confined to sand and stone but becomes a living pattern for human life, waiting to be remembered and embodied. To arrive at the threshold of conclusion after passing through the corridors of this exploration is to recognize that we, too, have walked through a kind of symbolic temple. We began in the outer courtyard, marveling at the stones that refused to crumble under time's hand, and we traced the geometry of their design, discovering that the ancients had not only beauty but wisdom in proportion and form. We moved inward into the mythic chambers, where Osiris, Isis, Horus, and Ma'at still live as allegories for the forces within us. We asked what all of this could mean for a life lived here and now, and we uncovered that these temples were never meant to be mute monuments but living mirrors, reflecting back to us the eternal rhythms of existence. Now, in the final sanctuary of this journey, the question is no longer about what the ancients knew but about what we are willing to remember. The Egyptian temple, with its silence and stone, does not demand worship of forgotten gods. It invites us into remembrance, that life itself is patterned, that existence is woven with intelligence, and that we are not exiles wandering aimlessly but participants in a design of staggering elegance. The blueprint hidden inside is not a secret scroll or an esoteric relic but a recognition. The architecture of the cosmos is echoed in the architecture of our own being. To live forgetful of this is to stumble in shadows. To live in alignment with it is to step into the light of coherence, where life makes sense not as a puzzle but as a symphony. Think of the temple's design one final time. You enter from the world outside, noisy, fragmented, full of distraction. You step into the courtyard, where many voices mingle, and you begin to notice the orientation of space, how even the walls seem to breathe a rhythm. Then you move deeper, leaving behind the clamor, and in each chamber the light grows dimmer until you are left in silence, where only a shaft of sun falls upon the altar. In that stillness, something within you awakens. This is not architecture alone, it is pedagogy, initiation, transformation. It teaches us that to reach the sanctuary of truth, we must be willing to leave behind distraction, to pass through silence, and to allow illumination to rise from within. That is the blueprint, not a diagram of stone but an instruction for living. The ancients encoded this truth in myth because myth carries what logic cannot hold. They spoke of gods not because they wished to escape into fantasy but because gods are the eternal patterns clothed in story. The dismemberment of Osiris, the faithful devotion of Isis, the birth of Horus, the weighing of the heart before Ma'at, all are reflections of our lives. We, too, are dismembered by chaos, and we, too, must be gathered by compassion. We, too, are weighed each day by the choices that either lighten or burden the heart. And we, too, are capable of birthing new vision from the union of struggle and devotion. These are not myths to be admired from afar but truths to be lived. What, then, is the call that echoes from the temple into our present moment? It is a call to live consciously. To see life not as random fragments but as a coherent design. To honor the rhythms of nature, to listen for harmony, to cultivate silence so that illumination may arise. It is a call to treat each moment as sacred, not by withdrawing from the world but by recognizing that the world itself is already sacred, already alive with hidden meaning. The temple urges us to remember that we are not spectators of the cosmos but expressions of it, woven of the same order, pulsing with the same light. This remembrance is not for philosophers alone. It belongs to the farmer rising with the sun, the parent gathering the fragments of a family, the seeker sitting in silence, the weary heart longing for renewal. It belongs to all who pause, even for a moment, to feel that life is larger than their worries, that beneath the noise there is an order, a blueprint, an unshakable harmony waiting to be recognized. The temple speaks across millennia to remind us that this is not belief but experience, not dogma but alignment. And so, as we step out of the temple, back into the world of wind and sand, traffic and screens, the invitation lingers. Will we live as though life is random, or will we walk as though each step is part of a sacred design? Will we see the rising sun as routine, or as the daily rebirth of light within and without? Will we allow the heart to grow heavy with falsehood and fear, or will we strive to keep it light, aligned with truth? These are the questions the temple places gently into our hands. The transformational call is simple yet profound, live as a temple. Let your words be the hymns, your actions the rituals, your heart the sanctuary, and your awareness the altar where light falls each day. In doing so, you do not merely honor the wisdom of the ancients, you become it. You become the living blueprint of reality, a participant in the eternal harmony that those stones, carved so long ago, were built to reveal. And so we close, not with an ending but with an opening. For the temple does not conclude, it continues, as long as there are eyes to see, hearts to feel, and lives willing to awaken. The blueprint is here, hidden in stone, hidden in myth, hidden in the quiet pulse of your own being. The choice is yours, to walk past it as though it were ruin, or to step into it as though it were the door to eternity.